All right, guys, well, welcome to week 14. I know it's the week after writing week, so we're all excited that's over. However, it is a tough week with a lot of content, so let's get started. First, we're going to pick up with the Portuguese. Now, the Portuguese are going to be traditional fishers anyway, so they're going to have a vast amount of sea experience to start with, and then they're going to expand upon it. They are going to discover the Azores, which are off the coast of Africa, and they're going to adopt this land into planting sugarcane, which is going to be a massive cash crop for them for a while. Now, the Portuguese are going to get caught up in the lure of trade. They're going to try to seek a route to Asia, trying to buy spices, silk, and porcelain. Now, the Silk Road at this point is still very dangerous since the bubonic plague. A lot of that has still not completely died down, even though bubonic plague is clearly in period 3. When we get into period 4, which we're in now, we still have a lot of problems with it. So because of the bubonic plague and because of all the death and the scared and the nasty, terrible things they heard about it, people were very concerned about it. Now, another reason why maritime trade is going to be more popular is because prices and profits are going to significantly increase. It's going to be more... It's going to make you more money if you get those spices, especially in large amounts. Now, Indian pepper, Chinese ginger are increasingly becoming more and more essential to the European diet for the wealthy. They're going to depend on it. They're willing to pay whatever they can to get it. So people are going to go out of their way to be able to provide that. African gold, ivory, and slaves are also going to be in high demand, and sea trade is going to allow that to happen. Now, they are going to use the lure of trade to make the excuse this is for missionary efforts. Missionary. We're going to see Franciscan, Dominican, and are going to go to India, Asia, and China and try to spread the word. It is not going to be as successful as a lot of their other ventures, but it does have some sort of effect. We're also going to see, because of the Crusades and the violent efforts that the Crusades endorsed, we're going to see the Reconquista, which we'll come and speak about a little bit more in depth. Now, the technology of exploration improves so much that it allows everything else to happen. If it wasn't for the improvement of technology, there would be no age of exploration. One of the big things is the Chinese rudder. Square sails are now being replaced by triangular sails, and these are all going to allow them to catch better crosswinds. Navigational instruments, specifically the astrolabe, knowledge of the winds is going to increase, and they're going to be able to sail backwards and cut through the wind now instead of just being caught with the wind. So the mastery of the sailing is going to increase dramatically. Now, this is the map for this week, which you all know by now because I showed you in class. Good luck. It was a little frustrating, but it's important to know where these winds are taking people because it's the movement of people. Now, some of the major Portuguese breakthroughs is going to be Prince Henry of Portugal. He's going to start his own navigation school. He's going to promote exploration specifically on the west coast of Africa, which will eventually lead to the New World and trying to find a route to Asia. We're also going to see the idea of fortified trading posts, which are ports, which will grow into actual colonies as the progression starts. But it starts off as just posts. In 1488, Bartholomew Dias sails around the Cape of Good Hope, and he's the first one to do it. And this will lay the groundwork for Vasco da Gama, who goes all the way to India by 1500. And all of a sudden, Calcutta is now a Portuguese port. Now, Christopher Columbus is probably going to be the most famous of the sailors. He believed the earth was much smaller than it was. He believed that if he sailed west, he would end up in the east. Now, he estimated that Japan was actually 2,500 miles away from the Canary Islands, when in fact it's 10,000 miles. Now, because of his inability to calculate correctly is what we found the New World. Portuguese kings do not support this, and they think Columbus is a weirdo, so no go. So Columbus turns and goes to Fernando and Isabel, or Ferdinand and Isabel, Italian bankers, underwrite the voyage, and he, ta-da, ends up in the Bahamas and the Cuba. Now, the big thing about Columbus's discovery is not actually what he did during his lifetime. He doesn't really do much. He makes 3 trips, He dies poor and alone, and nothing really becomes of him specifically. But because he opens up this whole new world, eventually about 100 years later, people actually start going back to this new world, and we have this Hemispheric Link. Now, Columbus tries 3 times, but he never reaches Asia. But by the 16th century, several powers are going to follow. And this is about 100 years later. English, Spanish, French, and Dutch. They're going to show up to the new world, and they're going to try to figure out what is there. Now, here's a map we did similar a couple weeks ago, just the different movements of people. Now, the circumnavigation of the globe is going to be the priority. Vasco Núñez de Bilbao finds Pacific Ocean while searching for gold in Panama in 1513. However, he has no idea how to reach Asia, so he turns back. So he does make it to the Pacific. Now, Ferdinand Magellan is going to be the first one who circumnavigates the globe. He is not supported by the Portuguese and sails in service of Spain. However, he is Portugal. He sails through the Strait of Magellan at the southern tip of South America. He and his crew are going to suffer from scurvy. Only about 18 out of 250 sailors are actually going to make it. Magellan is eventually killed by a local dispute in the Philippines and never returns, but he still gets credit for it. Now, the exploration of the Pacific, what we're going to see is that the Mexicans are going to build up a Philippines-Mexico trade route. And this trade route is going to move the tons and tons of gold they're eventually going to be exporting from there. The English and the Russians are going to be looking for a northwest passage to Asia. They're going to try to go up around Canada to get there. Most of the route is clogged by Arctic ice. We're eventually going to see that there is no route really there, except one person does do it once. Now, Sir Francis Drake of England explores the west coast of North America. The Bering of Russia sails through the Bering Strait, which is what it's known for today, and James Cook of England explores southern Pacific. Now, the English trading posts and empires. Now, the Portuguese, as they're going around and settling and landing in new areas, they set up trading posts. Now, there's about 50 to mid-16th century. Now, the goal of them originally was not to set up trade monopolies, but rather charge duties. If people were using their routes, people were using their ports, they wanted to collect taxes of it. What's the point of claiming something if you can't make any money off of it? So the Portuguese are just trying to make some money off of their famous explorers. So Afonso de Albuquerque is a major naval commander, and he is the one who comes up with how to charge people for duties, how to make things happen. Violators would have hands amputated. Imagine being, a captain with no hands. So eventually the Portuguese control declines by the end of the 16th century, and we're going to see the rise of the English and the Dutch. Now, the Dutch and the English are going to rival and essentially try to conquer the same territories, which makes it a little bit awkward. Now, the English concentrate on Indian trade, while the Dutch focus on Cape Town, South Africa, Colombo, which is going to be southern tip of India, and southern Pacific. So they're in the same kind of territory, and we're going to see this is going to lead to a major conflict. Now, the trading companies are going to be a huge force. Now, the advantage of the Dutch and the English over the Portuguese is going to be their amount of force. Now, the English have the East India Trade Company, which was established in 1600. Now, the Dutch United East India Trade Company, also known as the VOC, was established in 1602. Now, these companies are privately owned ships with government support. So the government is supporting them, but the government's not providing the ships. The cool thing is that these companies have authority to make up a empire essentially to dominate trade. They are empowered to engage in trade, build posts, and even make war. These companies are monopolies. They are conquering everything and are quite the force. They are making so much money for their countries, it's only going to lead to problems. One of the problems we're going to see is between England and Spain. Now, before we can get there, we have to talk about it first. Now, European conquests in Southeast Asia. Now, Spanish conqueror Philippines, named after Philip II. Manila becomes a major port city. Okay, it's going to have a lot of Chinese traders that highly resent the Spanish because they feel like they're invading their turf, which makes sense. Frequent massacres throughout 17th century up into the 19th century is going to create a lot of, tension between the Europeans and obviously the Philippines, and we're also going to see significant missionary activity. So we're going to see a lot of Christianity actually still is going to exist there today. Now the Dutch are going to concentrate on the spice trade in Indonesia. They're going to establish Batavia and trading posts in Java, and they're going to have less missionary activity. They're not very religious, even still to this day actually. So now on your map, we were labeling all these things, so please keep that in mind as we're going through. Maybe have your map out and kind of point out these things and kind of pause, see where the English and the Spanish and the Dutch are all located. Now the Russians are kind of getting going here. Now the Russians take over the Mongol Khanates, or the Mongols come in and take over Russia, and the Russians finally take over them in the 16th century. Now Astrakhan becomes a major trading city for Russia. Caucasus are absorbed in the 18th century, Siberian expansions in the 16th and 17th century. What this all means is Russia is now expanding. Russia is now growing outward from just a good-sized nation now into a larger nation that was dominated by the Mongols. It's now starting to spread into it. Now, because the Mongols have been so successful with conquering, they're also going to start trading. Now, they're going to start trading with the indigenous Siberian people. With little success with missionary efforts, they're going to try to do Eastern Orthodox. It doesn't really do much for them. And they're going to have some local rebellions. We're going to see that these Siberian natives are going to cause bigger problems for them later. Now, the Siberians are going to see, now we think of Siberia and we assume immediately it's Russia, but actually the Russian occupation of Siberia is where the Russians are going to send all their criminals and prisoners of war. You're going to go to Siberia. There was a joke, at least when I was growing up and in previous generations, that if you got in trouble and your teacher sent you to the corner of the room, you'd be sent to Siberia, and that's actually what happened. The Russians would send people to Siberia. Now, disgruntled peasants migrated east, and with this migration east, we're going to have a lot more people on the European side of Russia, and all of a sudden trade is going to really start to increase. Now, the Russian population is going to expand dramatically because of all this movement and people moving more into the European side. The new Russians in Siberia are going to outnumber the indigenous people, and eventually there's really not that many people to protest when there's so many, Russians there. Now, the 7 Years' War is going to be the largest commercial rivalry between empires at the sea. Now, the global conflict is going to arise in multiple theaters in Europe, India, Caribbean, and North America. Now, in North America, we call it the French and Indian War. Now, the British are going to emerge from this war victorious, and they are going to establish primacy in India and Canada. So at this point, England is going to take over control of India. Now, we should know from reference of life that India was controlled by the British up until the 1930s, 1920s, when Gandhi is going to take over and lead a peaceful resistance. So that's where they get their initial hold of it, is from the 7 Years' War. Now, the Columbian Exchange is going to be named for Christopher Columbus. Now, remember, when Christopher Columbus discovered America, no one really cared. It was in Asia. They didn't have the goods that they wanted, so no one really cared. Now, the reason why Christopher Columbus is such a big deal is because of the global diffusion. Plants and crops, animals, human population, disease, pathogens, all of those things that are coming from the old world to the new world are going to spread. All of these things in the old world and the new world are going to spread to the old world. Now, the reason why this is a big deal because it links previously independent biological zones for the first time. Beforehand, there was no interaction between the two, which means everyone is completely on their own. Now, this is going to permanently alter human geography and the natural environment. Things like sugar, tobacco, corn, not tomatoes. I can't think of another one right off the top of my head. Those are going to now be worldwide instead of just located in America. Now, the biggest thing about the Columbian Exchange is the disease. The Americans aren't prepared for European diseases because they have no experience with them at all. Smallpox is going to wipe out pretty much everyone left. Anyone who does not die of smallpox is probably going to die of some cold and some other stuff. But most people are going to die of smallpox. Some are going to die of measles, diphtheria, whooping cough, and influenza. Now, all of those, measles, smallpox, whooping cough, influenza, those are all European diseases. So these Americans, these Native Americans, have no exposure to any of these previous germs. So when these germs come to the shores for the first time, they just get demolished. By 1915, a smallpox in Aztec Empire, the population declines by 90%. Within 100 years, the population in the Americas went from 17 million to 1.3 million. That is how devastating that the Columbian Exchange is because of the disease. Now, some of the big things that are coming across in it is food and crops. Now, the Columbian Exchange is also going to benefit the New World and the food supply as well. Now, the introduction of European animals like horses, pigs, cattle, chickens are going to benefit everyone. Keep in mind that American societies did not have beasts of burden. All of a sudden, with the Spanish showing up, they're bringing horses, they're bringing oxen, they're bringing cows. All of a sudden, we do have these beasts of burden, which are going to improve the amount of food they have. Now, the introduction of American foods to Europe, like maize, potato, beans, etc., are going to improve significantly major territories. So we're going to see that because of the Columbian Exchange, there's going to be a massive growth in worldwide population. Now, migration is also going to be affected by the Columbian Exchange. We are all of a sudden going to have enslaved Africans who are going to go from South America to North America and the Caribbean. And we're also going to have European pioneers who are going to go over to the New World and try to settle and have a unique opportunity. All of these things are going to be triggered now because of the Columbian Exchange. Now, because of all of these movements of people, movements of goods, we're going to see the origins of global trade. Now, transoceanic trade in the Atlantic Ocean basin is going to start occurring. So not only do we have the Indian Ocean trade basin, we now have the Atlantic trade basin. We are going to move manufactured goods from Europe and take raw goods from the Americas. So we're exporting all the raw goods from the Americas, bringing it to Europe. Europe is going to process it and sell manufactured goods to America. Now, the Manila galleons are going to be the Spanish galleons that are going to dominate the Pacific Ocean trade. They're the ones who are going to be having all the wealthy goods of silk, spices, all that. They're also going to have American raw materials, especially silver and gold. Now, the environmental effects of global trade is fur-bearing animals are going to be hunted to extinction or near extinction. Whales, codfish, and other animals are going to start being hunted on a massive scale. So we're going to see that animals are really going to have a hard period this period. A lot of animals are going to die because of Europe's taste for fur. Relentless human exploitation of natural environment is going to lead to quite the demise. Now, let's head to transformation of Europe. Now, in transformation of Europe, we're going to see a ton of information. It's going to come quick. It's going to come fast, so let's get started. Now, the Protestant Reformation is going to start with a guy named Martin Luther. Now, Martin Luther is going to attack the Catholic Church practices in 1517. He's going to complain about this thing called indulgences, which shows preferential pardons to charitable donors. What that means is people are paying for forgiveness for their sins, and the Catholic Church is saying, oh, well, since you paid us, you can now go to heaven, which he is going to argue that sets them up for failure, and the Catholic Church should not be leading them astray. How can we say they're going to heaven when we know they're not in exchange for money? So in a really super pissed off mood, Martin Luther writes the 95 Theses, and it rapidly reproduced with new printing technology. So he posted on the door, and essentially he writes these 95 things, and he wants someone else to argue. So he sets up a date for a week later, and he hopes to be challenged. Well, the thing is, someone took it down and made copies of it in a new thing called a printing press and started passing it around. Well, people read his arguments and thought he had such a powerful case. He started a reformation or a complete change or a revolution for the Catholic Church. Now, Martin Luther, you can't really do that to the Catholic Church and think the Catholic Church isn't going to have anything to say about it. So he gets excommunicated. But at this point, he's starting his own thing, and it's growing to be this big thing, and he doesn't care. Now, in the 1520s to the 1530s, dissent spread up throughout Germany and to Switzerland, and starts spreading throughout the world of the Catholic Church and all of its corruption. And it's going to catch on. Now, the major roots of the reform are going to be the church's political involvement. Like, how can a religious structure be so involved politically? Their involvement with all the wealth, the power, and the greed and the corruption that's going through the church. That's really the root of Martin Luther's issues. And a lot of people are going to start having those issues. Churches faces criticism. Remember, Henry IV is the first person to really openly challenge the church. Well, now people are saying things out loud. And the demand for more personal involvement with the divine. All of a sudden, in Roman Catholicism, you have to go to a father or a priest to go and speak to God, essentially. You use that as the highway to God. Well, Martin Luther is preaching, God didn't want us to have to go through a church. He wanted us to have an intimate relationship. Now, the idea of having an intimate relationship with no need to have a church was found to be very attractive to a lot of people, and that caused a lot of people to jump over. Now, Martin Luther's expanded critique. Now, he wanted the closure of monasteries. He didn't think anyone should be living off of the church and sitting around studying. He thinks they should be with the people. His translation of the Bible into vernacular, which means he's not going to keep it in Latin, which it was currently written in. He's going to be writing it in French and Spanish and German in order to make it more accessible to the common people. Keep in mind, the only people who are really reading Latin at this time are the church officials. So if the church officials are the only ones who can read the book, then everyone depends on the church in order to be able to hear the words of the Bible. So Martin Luther is like, well, no, we should write in the language that people can understand in order for the people to be able to have access to God's word. He also believes that there should be an end of priestly authority, especially the Pope. He believes that there is no reason why there's a Pope. He believes God wanted him and his people to have a one-on-one relationship, and they don't need a Pope to tell them what to do. He also believes that German princes are going to become interested in what Martin Luther is going to say, and obviously this is going to be an opportunity to take over more local control. Now it's going to take power away from the Catholic Church, which is why governments are going to see this as very attractive. If the people go along with it, all of a sudden the kings aren't going to have to deal with the Catholic Church anymore. Eventually it is going to spread outside Germany. And once it gets out of Germany, it's going to go to Switzerland. England is going to kind of catch on. Now, England has its own reasons for it. King Henry VIII, he has a conflict with the Pope over a divorce he wanted from his second wife or first wife. I don't know. He has 8 of them. Anyway, the Pope rejects him. So he's like, well, fine. If you're going to reject me, then I'll just reject the religion. Now, he's doing it because he wants a divorce, not necessarily on a more physiological reference as what Martin Luther is doing, but he essentially rejects the Catholic Church and he turns England non-Catholic. Now in France we're gonna have a guy named John Calvin. He's gonna codify Protestant teachings while in exile in Geneva and whatever. And he's going to be there and he's going to come up with a new type of religion. It's not a new type of religion. It's a new religious sect called Calvinism. And in Scotland, Netherlands, Hungary also experience reform movements where Catholicism is going to be rejected. Now, because of all these people leaving Catholicism, it's going to cause a huge problem in the Catholic Church. Now, the Roman Catholic Church is going to have to react. They have to do something. All these people are leaving. So what they're going to do is they're going to refine their doctrine. What that means is they're going to assess what priests can and cannot do. They're going to try to do missionary activities to Protestants to try to bring them back. And they're going to try to do a renewal of spiritual activity where it's not so much business. It's more of a connection with God. One of the big councils they're going to have is the Council of Trent, which is they get together and focus on the reform. Now, the Society of Jesus, also known as the Jesuits, are going to be a very rigorous religious and secular education, and they have very effective ministries trying to go out and get more Catholics involved. However, they're going to be seen as a much more extreme. Now, because of religious tensions going on in Europe between this Protestants and this Catholic problem, we're going to have prominent regions of tensions between the Catholics and these Protestants by the late 15th century development in the belief in the devil and human assistance. Devout Catholics believe that the Protestant Reformation was brought on by the devil himself, that the devil was finally convincing people to leave the Catholic Church. People who were Protestants believed that the Catholics were full of the devil because of their corruption of religion. So going back and forth, we have a lot of use of witches. Literally, witches. They called each other witches. By the 16th and 17th centuries, approximately 110,000 people were put on trial. About 45,000 people were put to death for being the devil, or having the devil inside of them, or working with the devil. These are how extreme the Protestant and the Catholic Reformation got. I mean, people get crazy, and they are going around and calling their neighbors witches and making crazy assumptions about other people. Now, most of these are going to be females, usually single or widowed. There's a lot of really strong arguments about this, is that it's going to be the suppression of women's independence, that by the beginning of period 4, women were starting to be able to work and be outside the home, and this is a way to keep women down, which is an interesting theory. Now, the New England Salem witch trials are going on at this point. 234 witches are tried, 36 are hung. As a Bostonian, I know this well. Now, the religious wars are going to start. We're going to have the Protestant and the Roman Catholics are going to fight in France. In 1588, Philip II of Spain attacks England to force to return to Catholicism. It's going to fail. It's called Spanish Armada. It's not good. Anyway, English destroys Spanish ships by sending flaming unmanned ships into the fleet. There's also going to be a major storm. There's also going to be, some big rocks that they didn't account for. But eventually the English will win, and we'll get back to the Spanish Armada here in a few minutes. Now, the Netherlands are going to rebel against Spain and gain independence. Now, the Netherlands are going to want to become more Protestant. So the idea of being Protestant and Catholic are going to cause wars all around the world, and people are still fighting these problems. In Ireland today, there's still a lot of problems about Protestants and Catholics. So now the 30-Year War is going to be when the Holy Roman Emperor, who's still around, still kicking it, attempts to force Bohemians to return to the Roman Catholic Church. It's not going to go well for him at all, but all Europe becomes involved in the conflict. Now, most people are fighting in Germany. Political and economic issues are involved. Approximately 1/3 of the German population is destroyed. They're just wiped out. It's not a pretty thing. It's all about Catholicism versus Protestants. Now, the consolidation of the sovereign states. Now, Emperor Charles V attempts to revive the Holy Roman Emperor as a strong center of Europe. Now, through marriage and political alliances, he does pretty well, but he eventually fails. The Protestant Reformation provides cover for local princes to assert greater independence, because if they convert to Protestantism, they are going to be able to live without the Pope telling them what to do. If you're a Catholic, you have to take direction from the Pope. So you're going to see a lot of governments are going to be like, hey, this Protestantism is a pretty great idea because I don't have to listen to the Pope anymore. Foreign opposition from France and the Ottoman Empire is going to be affected. But unlike China, India, Ottoman Empire, Europe does not develop a single empire, rather individual states. So China is all going to be in one empire. Europe is going to fall into individual sovereign states, and this is going to be what we call France, what we call Germany, and these ideas. Now, he eventually is going to abdicate to a monastery in Spain. So Charles V is so religious and so devout to his Catholicism, he leaves his throne in order to live a life of peace in a monastery and prayer. Now, 16th century Europe is where we're going to start seeing a lot of the things that we see here in modern day. Now, we have monarchies. Italy is going to be well-developed as an economic power through trade, manufacturing, and financing. This is all routed in the Crusades, which is only going to continue to improve. Now, England, France, and Spain are going to surge ahead in the 16th century with innovative new tax revenues. Henry VIII is going to have fines and fees for royal services, confiscated monastic holdings, or anything from the Catholic Church. The state is going to take over. Now, France, Louis XI and Francis I is going to have a new tax on sales and salt trade. So all of a sudden, these new monarchies are coming up with new ways in order to make revenue. With more revenue the government has, the more it's going to be able to do and build and finance. So the Spanish Inquisition now is founded by Ferdinand and Isabella, also known as Fernando, in 1478. Now, the original task was to search for secret practitioners of Judaism or Islam, and then eventually turns into searching for Protestants. So if you are Jewish, Islamic, or a Protestant, you're gonna be guild. So essentially they're trying to eradicate anyone who has any of these beliefs. Now, spread to Spanish holdings outside Iberian Peninsula and Western Hemisphere. So what they're doing is now, not only do they try to clean their own country of Jews, Muslims, and Protestants, they are actually trying to clean out their colonies as well. Imprisonment and executions are going to be very, very common. Intimidated nobles who might have considered Protestantism. Archbishop of Toledo is imprisoned. Not a great time to be in Spain. Neighbors are turning against neighbors. Thousands of people in prison and killed. I mean, not a good time to be alive. Constitutional states. All of a sudden, we're going to have a rise in this thing called constitutional states. Now, England and the Netherlands are going to develop institutions of popular representation, which means the people are going to be represented. England creates a constitutional monarchy, while the Netherlands create a republic. Now, keep in mind, all of these have roots in the Greeks, which was tried to be done by the Romans, and here we are starting to see it again. Now, the English Civil War is going to begin with oppositions to royal taxes led by Oliver Cromwell, and he's going to overthrow the monarchy of Charles I. Now, religious elements of Anglican, which is the church that Henry VIII created, favors complex ritual, complex church hierarchy, and opposed by Calvinists and Puritans. Oliver Cromwell thinks that is crap, so he's going to try to overthrow it. Okay, the king loses and is eventually beheaded in 1649. Charles I, he is now dead. Now they go through the English Commonwealth and works for about 11 years, and that fails. Then they go through Restoration, and they invite Charles II back. Well, they hate Charles II, and then he dies, and then his son, James II, comes into power, and James II is a big turd. Well, anyway, when James II comes into power, they offer him, hey, you can stay and be king and we'll kill you, or you can leave and live. So he leaves. So then we have the Glorious Revolution. Now the Puritans take over and become a dictatorship. Now the monarchy is restored in 660 and fighting resumes. Now the resolution with a bloodless coup called the Glorious Revolution. James II is disposed. Mother Mary and husband of Orange take throne. And they shared governance between the crown and the parliament. And they're going to sign the English Bill of Rights, which the English Bill of Rights gives the monarchy more power, gives the parliament more power over monarchy. Now, the Dutch Republic is going to happen when the King Philip II of Spain attempts to suppress Calvinists in the Netherlands. We're going to see that the Dutch are going to revolt. Now, a large-scale rebellion is going to follow, and the Netherlands declare their independence. Now, based on a representative parliamentary system, they create their republic. Now, absolute monarchies are going to be the new big thing in Europe. Now, they're going to have the divine right of kings. Divine right believes that God appointed them to rule, so anything they say is the will of God. Now, this is calling on God, saying God told you to do, and is a pretty great way to justify any behavior, and that's what they're going to do. Now, French absolutism, which is going to be the most extreme and the most powerful example, is going to be designed by Cardinal Richelieu under Louis XIII. Now, he is going to destroy castles of nobles, crashed aristocratic conspiracies, built bureaucracy to bolster royal power, and ruthlessly attack Calvinists. So he's going to do everything to destroy the nobles' ability to be independent. Now, because he destroys their ability to be independent, they now become dependent on the king. Once they're dependent on the king can do whatever the hell he wants. And ta-da, here is Louis XIV. This king does whatever the hell he wants. He is known as the Sun King. He builds himself a magnificent palace of Versailles in the 1670s, and this becomes his court. It's the largest building in Europe for quite some time. 1,400 fountains, 25,000 beautifully grown trees are moved there. It is the place to be. Now, it is power centered in the court, and important nobles pressured to maintain presence. So, Louis XIV takes all of the people of France, all of the people in power in France, and forces them to be in this beautiful, lavish palace, and he controls them every single day. And he gets whatever the hell he wants. Now, absolutism in Russia is going to be a little bit different with the Romanov dynasty. It's going to start with Peter I, or Peter the Great, and he's going to work to modernize Russia on Western European model. So he's going to see what Russia is doing, see what the Europeans are doing, and try to modernize it. Now, develop modern Russian army, reformed Russian government bureaucracy, demand changes in fashion, no more beards. This is big claim to fame, and built a new capital in St. Petersburg, which is on the western side. So we are shaking off our Mongols, and we're trying to join the world. No more beards for Russians. Now, Catherine the Great is the next big of the Russian absolutist. She is going to do a huge military expansion. So they're going to the partitions of Poland, which is going to be a huge problem coming up in World War II, but we'll get to that later. They're going to have major social reforms at first, but end with the Polish peasant rebellion. So eventually the people are going to rebel. So all of a sudden, Russia is now trying to modernize and trying to keep up with the rest of the country. Remember, they were expanding and getting more and more so into trade. Now, the European state system is what we've been creating. We're talking about individual states like Spain, individual states like France, individual states like Russia. All this is the European state system. With no imperial authority to mediate regional disputes, they come up with the Peace of Westphalia after the 30 Years' War, which means European states to be recognized as sovereign equals, which means France cannot tell Spain what to do, Spain cannot tell France what to do, and nobody can tell Germany what to do, and Germany can't tell Russia what to do. If you are a recognized state, you have power over your own domestic affairs. Now, of course, just because you sign a document called the Peace of Westphalia doesn't mean warfare is going to stop. Let's be real. Warfare is going to continue, and they're going to continue to oppose French expansion during the 7 Years' War. They're going to have powers going to be very tumultuous, and we're going to have a lot of military innovations, which are going to push people to want to use them. If you have guns, you want to use them. So we're going to see that's going to kind of create a little more tension between these European powers. Now, as population is growing, we're going to see more urbanization. Now, rapidly growing populations are due to the Columbian Exchange because there's better nutrition. We are going to see the potato, which is going to be seen as a major starch, and it replaces bread as a staple of the diet. Better nutrition reduces susceptibility to plague. Epidemic diseases become insignificant overall, and population decline overall population decline. So epidemic diseases are going to become significantly less because nutrition is better. We're also going to see economically, people are going to get stronger and wealthier. Earlier, capitalism is going to start. Private parties are going to offer goods and services on a free market, which means if I have an item that I can sell, I'm going to open up a little stall and I'm going to sell it. If I sell it, then the next day I'm going to come back and sell more of it, and then eventually I'll sell more and more and more. A free market also means if I have an item that no one wants and no one buys it, I fail. So you can either succeed or you can fail. We're also going to have the own means of production, which people are now trying to figure out how to make their products sell. Private initiative and not governmental control is going to lead to its thriving. Individual peoples are starting to come up with businesses and are not being dependent on the government, and this is going to open up a whole new economic venture. Supply and demand is going to determine prices. Banks, stocks, exchange develop in early modern period. Joint stock companies, for instance, English East India Company and the VOC, are going to have a relationship with empire building potential. Medieval guilds discarded in favor of putting out system, so no longer are we going to be capping ourselves and making sure that we have business in the future. We're trying to produce as much as we possibly can. Now, how does this capitalistic idea affect us? Rural life. It's going to improve access to manufactured goods. All of a sudden, goods that are being made in the city are now being moved out. Increasing opportunities to urban centers begins depletion of rural population, because all the opportunities in the cities with people coming up with opportunities to make money, there's more jobs. With more jobs, more people are going to be in the city. With more people in the city, more people are going to come to the city. Inefficient institution of serfdom is abandoned in Western Europe. It's retained in Russia until the 19th century. So this is why Russia's a little bit backwards as well. Serfdom, if you were a serf, you're just leaving at this point. Like, if you didn't leave after the plague, you're leaving now because you can make so much more money in the city. Nuclear families are replaced with extended families. We're going to see a lot more. During the bubonic plague, you would just have your immediate Now we're going back to extended families. So we're having multiple families in one house. Gender changes as women enter income-earning workforce. They're going to be the ones out there making goods, selling goods as well. Now, capitalism and morality. Now, Adam Smith is going to the most famous capitalist. He's argues that capitalism would ultimately improve society as a whole because people would have the opportunity and take the initiative if they wanted to do it. And if they didn't take the initiative, they would fail on their own. Major social changes increases poverty in some sectors. There's going to be a lot more rise in crime. Witch hunting is a possible consequence of capitalist tensions and gender roles. Because women are making money for the first time. A lot of people say, as I mentioned earlier, the Spanish Inquisition, when they're killing lots of women, is the suppression of women and trying to limit their ability to be independent, which is a pretty popular idea. So, capitalism, more people are making money, but we're also going to see a huge rise in crime. Now, let's get into the Enlightenment, which is one of my favorite time periods. Now, the Copernican Universe is the reconception of the universe. Now, the reliance on the second-century scholar who is going to believe that the Earth is in the center of the universe and everything revolves around it is going to be pretty consistent. Everyone believes that. Christians understand heaven as the last sphere, so the very last sphere of this whole thing is going to be, heaven. Now, the difficulty in reconciling this model with observed planetary movements is going to lead to Copernicus's theory in 1543 that the Earth is moving, not the sun, that we are moving around the sun. Now, the scientific revolution is going to really start with Kepler and Galileo. They're going to reinforce the Copernican model, and they're going to prove it to be true. Isaac Newton is going to revolutionize the study of physics, and he's rigorously challenged to church doctrines, which is going to cause a big problem. Now, women in science, William Harvey scientifically proves innate female inferiority, which is charming, that we have smaller brains, which is not true. Emily du Chaillant, which is a French mathematician and physicist, translated Newton's Principia Mathematica. We're also going to have, during the Enlightenment, a trend from Aristotelian philosophy and church doctrine in favor of rational thought and scientific analysis. Looking and crunching numbers is going to be seen as the center or the new place to pull information instead of the Bible and Greek and Roman scholars. John Locke of England is going to be a huge player, as well as Montesquieu, who attempted to discover the natural laws of politics. We're going to see that in the center of the Enlightenment, they're going to be the philosophes, and they're going to be the French philosophers who go around and talk at dinner parties and spread the ideas of these great men. Voltaire, he's going to continue to cause a lot of problems for the Roman Catholic Church. Deism, which is the belief in that a more scientific type of God, that God created all these things and he set it in motion and does not, and rules and laws govern it all, is going to be deism. Now, the theory of progress. Now, the assumption that the Enlightenment would ultimately lead to human harmony and material wealth is what the goal was. There's eventually a decline in authority of traditional organized religion. Because of the Enlightenment, we're going to see that most people are going to have a lot more challenge to religion. And that's what the theory of progress is all about. All right, guys, that's it for this week. As you can tell, it's a ton of content, a lot of information going on. But I know we're up for the challenge. I hope you have a great week and have a great night.